where we put our focus on are those most virulent threats that could actually come back to our homeland in the persistent threat against threats like Al Qaeda and ISIS and those networks. But then as we have looked at those sustainable capabilities against those threats, what else can come back? And that goes with both access and placement in other countries around the globe where counterterrorism can also equate to great power competition in some place like the Philippines, where our access and placement in helping the Filipinos fight ISIS allows us also to be involved in great power competition.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you both very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Now let me recognize Senator Gillibrand via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, for General Clark, we entrust the special operations community with some of our most important missions, and they have truly been the tip of the spear over the last decade. And I wonder if these units are not being overtasked or under-supervised. In recent years, we've heard troubling stories about SEALs and Marine Raiders, a murder of a Green Beret, and allegations of war crimes by Navy SEALs. So first, should we be more concerned about good order and discipline problems in this community? And second, even if these cases are being prosecuted appropriately, are we taxing the operators with too heavy a load? The chronic stress of these missions lead to post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. And third, are you adequately resourced to provide the necessary mental health treatment for these service members and their families?
Senator, the items that you bring up are exactly why I directed last year a comprehensive review to look at our forces. And while yes, I do believe that we were over-focused on employment and mission accomplishment, I do believe that through that comprehensive review, we have taken a hard look at ourselves and are making the corrective steps to ensure, I think most importantly, is that we have the engaged leadership present throughout the force at the right time to reduce those incidents from occurring that have been highlighted. I think one specific area that you mentioned, which is important, is in the resources in our preservation of the force and family, which Congress allocates to us. Today, more than 40% of our manpower that is associated with that is actually going to the cognitive and, most important, the psychological efforts to ensure that our special operators and their families are cared for.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer, as you know, the current Special Operations Force structure is largely derived from counterterrorism and foreign internal defense operations in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Do you think that this structure has created gaps in special operations capabilities to win against global rivals like Russia or China?
Senator, I think it has, and I think that's been recognized, and I think that's where we are laser focused on closing that gap. And whether that gap is, as General Clark alluded to, having higher end capabilities that's more data driven, more technology, more cutting edge, but also at the same time, as has already been highlighted, being able to do our counterterrorism mission in a sustainable fashion and reap some of the benefits of those partnerships that give us, frankly, an asymmetric advantage over our peer adversaries because we do work with so many countries in so many different ways. So this is absolutely something that I think the NDS has highlighted for us and within the SOF enterprise continue to be very focused on.
Thank you. General Nakasone, I really appreciate your leadership, and it was great to see you last week. I want to talk a little bit about sort of where we are, because in Feb 2020, when you were at a hearing, you said that we're understanding our adversary better than our adversary understands themselves. Well, obviously, we've just had the SolarWinds hack. Experts estimate that maybe 1,000 software engineers executed that operation. And so what did we get wrong? What do we do? What do we need to do to make sure we don't miss those kinds of assaults in the future? And what do you propose to address long-term concerns? And specifically, we've talked a lot about cyber workforce, about how to make sure we have the best and the brightest working for us so that we don't have intelligence gaps like this in the future.
Senator, with regards to our adversaries and understanding them, the comment I was making there was in reference to what we're seeing with their election influence. But I agree with you. We have to understand our adversaries better, particularly given the recent intrusions that are ongoing. Part of understanding our adversaries, though, is being able to see our adversaries. And so, again, if we have a problem where we only see our adversaries when they operate outside of their country, and we don't see them when they operate inside our country, it's very difficult for us to be able to, as I say, connect those dots. That's something that the administration and obviously others are addressing right now. In terms of what we're doing at U.S. Cyber Command, we are very much focused on how do we ensure that our capacity, our capability remains the best in the world. And that gets back to your point on people. What we have learned over the past couple of years, it's that the services bring in incredible talent for us. We are able to see these young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen come into our force, train them, but then our great challenge is how do we retain them? And that is something that certainly I give a lot of attention to every single day. And it's retaining the best of the people that we're able to bring in. Now, we've been able to leverage a number of the authorities that this committee has been able to generate for us. And so that's one of the areas that we're focused on right now. So as we continue to improve being able to see the adversary in its totality, we have the people that are able to apply, obviously, the capacity and capability to defend the nation.
I would like to work with the committee on getting you those authorities. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Let me recognize Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, good morning, and I thank you all for your service to our country, and I'd like to thank your families as well for their sacrifice as you continue that service. General Nakasone, I want to work through this issue a little bit more about whether or not we see our adversaries. And I'd like to just have a discussion with you. I understand that you've always made it very clear in all of our discussions that you're not here to tell us how to do public policy. But in order to make the public policy, we really do need your professional advice in terms of what's working and what's not. You've alluded to it a couple times today, and I'd really like to flesh this out. Right now, we have provided the ability for Cyber Command to use cyber activities as traditional military activity. And so you can work outside of a war zone as long as it's not within the United States. And our country has always said that our armed forces are not designed to be utilized within our country. They're designed to be used outside and to defend our country. And yet now we face cyber attacks where adversaries, near-peer adversaries, Russia, China, Iraq, North Korea, have figured out that because of the laws that we have in place to protect our personal privacy, that they're using internet connections to literally get into the United States and then to launch attacks, probably from systems that are found within the United States. It seems to me that most Americans would suggest that if we have the ability or we have a desire to stop those attacks, we either have to be able to defend forward, to go on out, to find them, and to literally provide a very active cyber defense outside in an offensive capability, or we have to have the ability, as I think you're suggesting, to be able to see inside of our own country and to find where they're actually launching those attacks at. I want to take a few minutes here and just allow you to expand on that and to share with us a little bit so that we have a better understanding of what the public policy challenges are that limit you from the ability to be able to see our adversaries here within the country.
Senator, thank you. So in terms of my authorities, as both the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the director of the National Security Agency, I operate outside the United States. Our forces do. It's not just a matter of policy, it's also law in terms of we as a nation, rightly so, have a very, very determined balance between privacy and security. So the authorities within the United States reside with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and others to do that type of surveillance. What I'm identifying right now, though, is our adversaries understand that they can come into the United States and rapidly utilize an internet service provider, come up and do their activities, and take that down before a warrant can be issued, before we can actually have surveillance by a civilian authority here in the United States. That's the challenge that we have right now. Now, I would offer that there are probably a number of different ways that we can look at this, whether or not it's greater public-private partnership, whether or not it's laws in terms of private sector understanding who their customers are. But these are all areas that I think we as a nation have to be able to address.
Thank you, General Nakasone. I just really think it's important that we share with the American public. This is not a case of where we're not technically adept. This is a case of where we've made laws that we think are correct in that we don't use our resources, our military uses within the United States, but we do expect that our other law enforcement capabilities are able to coordinate and to rapidly assist you so that you can go on out and find and take these folks out before they do it again, so to speak. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Senator, I'd offer that this is at the heart of our Fourth Amendment. And so being able to obviously look at that in terms of why it's so important that we have that right balance between privacy and security that is maintained. And so being able to address that obviously is the challenge that we have going forward.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Meyer, I want to just bring up an issue that I think is really important. Secretary Mattis implemented a close combat lethality task force in 2018. This is an organization dedicated to providing resources and policy solutions to the force who have accounted historically for nearly 90% of all the casualties, yet constitute only 4% of the force and receive only 1% of institutional investments. This has been and will remain as a very important legislative priority for my office. Nevertheless, despite its noble goals, this task force has floundered in the bureaucracy over the last year, and I'd like to see it get back on track. Can you give me your perspective on the need for an effective cross-functional team, such as this task force, that would be focused on our special operations forces, as well as Army and Marine and infantry units and their enablers? And I know that I'm 30 seconds over my time allotted, so I'm asking the question now, but I would ask if you would respond for the record to that request.
Senator, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Now let me recognize Senator Cain, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Inhofe, and it's great to have these great public servants before us. General Nakasone, I'd like to begin with you. First, just congratulations. I just have been so impressed with the work of Cyber Command over my time on this committee, both in the 2018 election cycle and the 2020 election cycle. I think that you have just done a magnificent job, and I just wanted to state that up front. Here is a concern that I have. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm the chairman of the subcommittee that oversees the Western Hemisphere. We had a hearing yesterday on sort of democracy backsliding in the Western Hemisphere. And one of the areas of concern is that the next 2 years, 21 and 2022, are, I think one of the witnesses described it as sort of an avalanche of elections or a tsunami of elections in Central and South America in nations where we are partners. I spoke to the Colombian ambassador to the United States recently, and he talked about increasing cyber attacks that they are suffering to delegitimize elections, to promote chaos and division. Most of these cyber attacks seem to emanate from Venezuela, probably from Cuban or Russian actors in Venezuela. And other nations in the region that are allied with the United States are seeing the same thing. The Colombian ambassador to the United States asked if Southcom and Cybercom could be of assistance in this significant wave of elections in the next couple of years. And so I wanted to ask you, we had our posture hearing with Southcom last week. What are you doing, or what might Cyber Command do together with Southcom to try to help our allies in the region avoid this escalating trend of disinformation that destabilizes democratic elections?
Senator, let me begin by, first of all, thanking the committee. What you refer to our successes in 2018 and 2020 are based upon the work that this committee did in the FY19 NDAA to identify cyber as a traditional military activity. That allowed us to operate outside of our networks. It allowed us to do things like hunt forward operations, of which we did 11 hunt forward operations in 9 different countries for the security of the 2020 election. In terms of working with Admiral Fowler and Southcom, both the Admiral and I have discussed a series of countries that are coming up. We have worked together to identify teams that can assist these countries to provide advice. We know a lot about what our adversaries are doing in terms of influence and interference when an election comes to part. And so we want to make sure that we share that with our allies as well.
I think the U.S. has played a good role. EUCOM has played a good role with the NATO and European nations with, cyber defense, often centered in Estonia, a great center there of cyber defense, and I hope that we might explore what we can do in the Americas as well. Thank you for that. Senator Shaheen asked some questions about war powers that we have to grapple with, and I'm going to have one question for each, General Nakasone and General Clark. In the war powers resolution, basically it requires, and there's some confusion and some good faith argument about the legality of portions of the 1974 War Powers Resolution, but it requires notice from the administration to Congress when the U.S. military is engaged in hostilities or situations that can lead to hostilities. And one of the things I've noticed on the committee is over time, even recently, we'll get a notice letter from the administration, for example, about the strikes that were carried out in Syria. If my memory is not playing tricks on me, I don't believe we've ever gotten a notice letter about a cyber, an offensive cyber action carried out by Cyber Command. Am I right about that?
So we do have a very strict congressional notification that we do adhere to. I think we had just recently had published a congressional notification for the committee. I'll go back and check, though, just to make sure on that, Senator.
Okay. It may be that it goes to some on Intel or other committees and may not go to all the members of this committee, but I would like to explore that. And secondly, to General Clark, the War Powers Resolution does have a reporting exception for deployments which relate solely to the supply, replacement, repair, or training of forces in a foreign nation. So if we deploy forces to do those things, there's not a reporting requirement under the War Powers Resolution. And yet sometimes those activities, as in the sad case of the loss of 4 service members in Niger, I think it was in 2017, they can lead to military action and even loss of U.S. life. And that is something, again, I just think we need to grapple with. The notion of what hostilities are might be quite a bit different than it was in 1974 when Congress drafted the resolution and passed it, and it may require that we sort of get into what is the current nature of hostilities and warfare and grapple with that a bit. And last, I'll just say to you, General Clark, not a question, but thank you to you and Secretary Mayer. The Special Forces community is a really important and valued portion of our Commonwealth, and we thank you for the work that you do. I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cain. Let me recognize Senator Cotton, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. General Clark, on January 20th, President Biden and his National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, issued a directive that withdrew authority to conduct certain military operations outside of Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan from our combatant commanders and reserved it to the White House itself. Has that affected operations, Special Operations Command, or is that simply affecting our regional geographic combatant commands?
Senator, I'm aware of that, of that as it was reported in the open source. I would respectfully submit or request that we talk about it in a closed hearing.
Okay. It has been confirmed by the National Security Council on the record, but I understand the hesitation. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Mayor, do you know the problem that decision was designed to solve? Because it's not apparent to me what problem was raised by having combatant commanders or their subordinate commands make the decision to conduct military operations outside of Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. And let's just get down to brass tacks here. We're talking primarily, I think, Yemen, Somalia, and the African Sahel.
So, Senator, I think it's meant to be an initial review of this administration and the use of a series of different actions that, again, we should probably talk about it in closed session. But I think, like a lot of the reviews that are underway, already alluded to, everybody on this committee certainly knows about Afghanistan, Somalia, the posture hearings and reviews that are underway. Those are all part of an overall series of looking at what has been done and whether this administration would continue to proceed with those.
Okay, we'll discuss it in the closed session. Again, this has been reported and confirmed by the National Security Council. To make a point, I'll relay a story the past president told me. I don't think he'll be offended if I share his thoughts. He said early in his administration, he was doing some reading late one night, and he got a call from an action officer about approving a strike. And his response was, well, what do they expect me to know about it? Don't they have some captain on the ground near this country that has been following this target and knows that this is a bad guy and that we should conduct this strike? And I agree with that sentiment. General Clark, I have the highest confidence in you and in General McKenzie and Central Command and General Townsend and Africa Command to know whether or not we should smoke a bad guy overseas. And that doesn't need to be decided by civilians at the White House. General Clark, I want to turn to Special Operations Command and something we discussed in our visit yesterday, and I just want you to elaborate for us on the record here. What specific changes in force design and capabilities do you believe are necessary to attain the force that you need to accomplish your mission going forward, and what do you believe are the most pressing of those needs?
Senator, in order for us to compete effectively in the future, and we have to modernize both our precision strike and ISR, we particularly have to look at data and data management so that the most specific requirements are enabled at the tip of the spear where our operators are, so that they can quickly see and sense the battlefield that they may have to be fighting into the time of crisis. And then we also have to have encrypted communications and electronic warfare capabilities so that our forces that could be forward with the joint warfighting capacity reduce the probability for them to be targeted. So we're looking at all these, Senator. I have personally, changed our modernization priorities and restructured some of our funding to modernize those capabilities.
Thank you. General Nakasone, in the time we have remaining, I want to ask a question that may seem to be a boring bureaucratic matter to some people watching, but it's an important question this committee has addressed in the past and that the Intelligence Committee has addressed as well. That's the so-called dual hat. In addition to being the commander of the Cyber Command, you're also the director of the National Security Agency. Is that right?
Correct, Senator.
And that is the so-called dual hat, that you command this military combatant command and also that you run an intelligence agency. What do you think are the positive things that result from wearing that dual hat?
Senator, over the past 3 years, what I've learned is being both the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency is that the ability for myself to operate in both roles provides the nation speed, agility, and flexible responses to adversaries that are increasingly modernizing, getting quicker, and getting more sophisticated. We operate in a domain that changes rapidly, and this change is measured in weeks, perhaps months. Being able to rapidly react to that, as we've been able to prove in such things as securities of elections in 2018 and 2020, is empowered by that relationship.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. See you in the closed session.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. And let me now recognize Senator King via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Nakasone, a couple of quick questions about your staffing. Would it help in terms of recruitment and retention if you had the authority as part of this process to forgive student loans? Would that be a factor that you think might be effective in helping to retain and bring on the people that you need?
Senator, certainly that would, and the services have that power as they recruit talent for our force. We have utilized it also with our civilian. But that is one mechanism that we get feedback that is very attractive to our workforce.
A second specific question: we've had a real backup problem in the past with the security clearance process. Is that improving, or has that been a barrier? I've heard of people that just get so discouraged they move on even though they've been accepted for a position.
Senator, has improved, and it's improved significantly over the past couple years. I applaud the work that's been done by the department to work that. But even with that said, for those that operate at U.S. Cyber Command, it does require a full security investigation. So there are times that there are a fraction of our workforce that takes longer than others.
I think that's something we have to continue to work on, because we don't want to lose good people who are making the commitment but can't set their lives aside for a year or more for that process to carry forward. You used the term at one point to change the subject. You used the term risk calculus. You've used the new authorities very effectively in the elections of 2018 and 2020 in terms of defending forward and engaging with the adversaries in their systems. Has that had a deterrent effect that you've observed? Do you believe that the adversaries are thinking twice about some of one of the things that they may be planning against us because they know of the capacity that you've demonstrated?
Senator, I continue to see our adversaries operate rapidly in terms of being able to try to operate below the level of armed conflict. We have effectively gone from being a very static to a very active force. As you referred to, defend forward, the department's cyber strategy of 2018 and our instantiation at U.S. Cyber Command of persistent engagement. How do you both enable your partners and act? We continue to do that. We are operating in a space where our adversaries are not going to stop. They are going to continue to look for ways to steal our intellectual property, to steal our identification, and to try to influence our populace. We, at the same time, have to be forward. We have to be operating, and we have to be engaged with our adversaries. And that's what has been my focus over the past couple of years.
Well, would you agree that we need to develop a cyber doctrine, if you will, of a declared deterrence? Because, as you say, they're going to continue to do this until they have a risk calculus that tells them that there will be a price to be paid that they are not willing to undertake.
So certainly, Senator, the policymakers continue to look at this type of doctrine, and I know that's being worked. From my perspective and my responsibilities, I am very, very focused on operationally, how do we ensure that we can operate against these adversaries that continue to try to operate below the level of armed conflict?
I think there's one point that's been discussed repeatedly today that really bears a lot of policy discussion, and that is the gap that you've identified where you're not able, either in Cyber Command or NSA, to operate within the United States, but our adversaries have learned that if they can hop and use a server or an ISP in the U.S., they can evade your surveillance. And then we have the FBI, as you mentioned, we're dealing with the fundamental issue of protection of privacy. But would you agree that this is a serious issue? SolarWinds is a perfect example where they operated in this country for something like a year, 9 months to a year, and were picked up by the private sector, not by our services. So I take it from your prior discussion, this is something we really need to focus upon. Isn't that correct?
I do think we need to focus on it, Senator. I would the only alteration I would make to it, it's not necessarily that it's U.S. Cyber Command or the National Security Agency that needs to be doing this. I'm saying that the nation needs an ability to be able to see what's going on within the United States.
No, I agree. I'm not saying that it's your job necessarily, but what I'm saying is this gap is an issue that we have to address, and SolarWinds points it up. I think one other point, and the time has expired, but that needs to be emphasized is the relationship with the private sector. You've already mentioned that, and that's something that we're going to be working on, I hope, in this session of Congress. That's a key part of cyber defense.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Let me now recognize Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today and for your command teams and as well the men and women within your commands. General Clark, certainly our Special Operations Force is probably the most capable military element on the face of the planet. And as well, General Nakasone, the men and women within Cyber Command have proven essential to us over the past number of years. So thank you very much for being here today. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you recently and discuss our SOLIC forces. We think it's really important. And General Clark as well. I'll start the questioning with you. I appreciate you sitting down a couple weeks ago and visiting about our shared commitment to the men and women of SOF. So thank you. Senator Inhofe and Senator Fisher touched a little upon some of the gray zone activities where our SOF covers down, and we know how important that is. As we've seen counterterrorism actions in the past, and as we move to, the near peer competition under the guise of our national defense strategy, we understand there needs to be a little shift. But if you can reinforce how important it is that we continue not only to adjust to that near-peer competition with our special operators, but also to continually focus on counterterrorism efforts.
Senator, as you know, SOCOM has to enable the joint force in both crisis, competition, and, if necessary, conflict. And in this space, there will remain that persistent threat, and we have to prioritize towards that persistent threat, and that would be groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But there are SOCOM and SOF unique capabilities that can be used in competition that the rest of the joint force doesn't have, and that could be things like undersea, seabed warfare. That only we provide, strategic reconnaissance that our forces are extremely capable of. And so as we look at that competition area, and as we look to modernize our force for the future, those are the specific capabilities that we will continue to work with this committee to move forward on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. And just as a reminder to this committee, as we are looking at potentially flat budgets for DoD in the future, we just need to understand the role that SOF plays, that SOCOM has around the globe, and that we do get a lot of bang for our buck when it comes to the men and women within your command. You know quite well that my heart and soul is behind POTF and how important it is. And I know, sir, that the fifth pillar of your command philosophy is health of the force, but we go back to the soft truth that humans are more important than hardware. And so this is something I've long been involved in. And if you could, please explain a little bit about what you're focusing on in the area of brain health.
No, thanks, Senator. I think it's important, that the entire committee understands when we started POTF, we focused on the physical. Our men and women who were physically wounded where you could see the wounds. And in the last couple of years, we have refocused those efforts towards cognitive and the psychological, as we saw suicides go up. But then we looked at the health of our force for 20 years of engaged combat. And now we have put more than 40% of our resources and capabilities specifically to the brain health and the cognitive domain and the psychological domain to be able to ensure that our operators are both physically and mentally capable. So we baseline all of our operators with their cognitive piece. So if there's reductions in their capabilities, if they actually have some type of concussive event, we can then go back later. We're working with industry, academia, and even elements like the National Football League in this space so we can make sure that we take care of our operators.
Right. And I think it's just important to stress that the investment into these activities is extremely important for, again, the preservation of our force. I have had the opportunity to visit a number of those types of activities in Coronado with Admiral Green a number of years ago as we kind of dove into behavioral health activities as well as spiritual activities, very important for our force, but then also the Thor 3 facilities that are available for our men and women of the force and making sure that they are physically strong and capable of what is expected of them by the American people. So again, we'll continue advocating on behalf of SOCOM and certainly appreciate your wonderful efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Let me recognize Senator Blackburn via WebEx. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Clark, thank you for the time. And the conversation yesterday, we talked about 40% of SOCOM's forces are aligned to support the great power competition fight. That is a big increase. So for the record today, I'd like for you to talk about the resourcing standpoint. What do you need from this committee in terms of authority, advocacy? What do you need to engage in near-peer competition from Beijing? And then let's talk a little bit about the posture that SOCOM has to counter these nefarious activities from the CCP and where you are positioned there. I think you can really do more with a lower dollar amount than the regular force. So love to just get your comments for the record.
Senator, thank you. As pointed out, with about 2% of the Department of Defense budget, I think we are a very good return on our investment with about 3% of the force. And the continued resourcing specifically for SOCOM so that we can modernize in this area where we can provide unique capabilities for our forces is critical. We have to balance both operations, readiness, and modernization. The continued support of this committee remains critical. As we look at, you specifically asked about our employment and our capacity at 40%. That is exactly right. We've in fact adjusted our forces to a sustainable presence against the persistent terrorist threats, while at the same time rebalancing those forces across the globe, as some of our competitors are now global threats and not necessarily specific to Europe or Indo-PACOM. And so we continue to look where our forces are located across the globe so they can counter those specific threats. And then the last thing I would hit in this area is the specific authority for our forces conduct unconventional warfare in this space. While I can take specific points in closed session, that authority that allows us to work with partner forces to increase both the resistance and resilience, working in the information space is absolutely critical. So, Senator, thank you.
Yes, and we talked a little bit about the term that you and Admiral Davidson use about slowing down China's clock. And I would like for you to hit just quickly on what that means and then what we can do with operations within that gray zone.
Senator, as you're well aware, we established the Joint Task Force Indo-Pacific. It's the first task force that went and is actually west of the international date line that we developed with Indo-PACOM to ensure that we work with like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific. And I think part and parcel of that is that element is focused on the information operations so that China, who works very well in this space of creating false narratives and not always being upfront with the messages that they sent, that we actually are able to tamp down some of the disinformation that they continuously sow, and that's an important part to SOCOM and to Cybercom is working in this information space.
And with the time remaining, we talked a little bit about OpTempo and the changes there and the comprehensive review from 2019. And where have you seen holistic improvement across the force, and where would you like to continue to see improvement?
Senator, through our comprehensive review, we have now ensured that by this year, all of our forces will be above a 2-to-1 deployment to dwell ratio. That will be the first time that has happened since September 2001. We continue to strive toward meeting the 3-to-1 dwell ratio for all of our forces, and some of our forces are already there, and we'll continue to strive in that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackburn. Before I recognize Senator Hawley, I will depart for the vote. Senator Inhofe will preside, and I'll return, and we will switch off. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. It's good to see you again. General Nakasone, let me start with you. Many companies use Chinese hardware like printed circuit boards in their information systems that they provide to the Department of Defense, including systems that are used to store or to transmit information. At the same time, DoD and others have warned that the Chinese government might be able to tamper with these Chinese-made products in order to create cyber vulnerabilities that they can exploit and use against us. My question is, do you think it's important for the department to at least know which systems contain Chinese printed circuit boards so that it can address potential cyber vulnerabilities and contain any exposure, any danger that's identified?
Senator, in light of the recent SolarWinds intrusion, I think this is, as you point out, an area that we as a department continue to look at very hard. There are procedures and processes that the department utilizes to verify this, but I agree that this is an area that we have to obviously shine a light on in the future.
Good. And do you agree that further steps would be useful in order to identify vulnerabilities here and as you just said, shine a light on this?
So, Senator, I'm a person that every single day is worried about the vulnerabilities that our adversaries might exploit. So you can well imagine that this is an area that I have a great deal of focus on right now.
Good. Well, I look forward to working with you on that. General Clark, let me come to you. The Baltic nations have spent some years honing their ability to conduct irregular warfare in the event that Moscow attempts to seize a Baltic territory so that it won't be able to hold it. It's become a key part of their deterrent strategy, as you know, in the Baltic region. What I'm wondering, why I'm asking about this is, do you think that the Baltic model could be applied in Taiwan? In other words, would helping Taiwan improve its irregular warfare capabilities help it deter potential Chinese aggression?
Senator, bottom line, yes. We have worked closely with the Baltics. I have met with every Baltic SOF commander personally, and we have been engaged in the Baltics for a long time. But we also, and I can talk more specifically in closed hearing, we remain close with capabilities for Taiwan.
Do you think that it would be helpful to us, and should we be prioritizing helping Taiwan develop its irregular warfare capabilities?
Yes, Senator, I do think we should help them.
Let me, still with you, General Clark, but switching topics. President Obama's former acting special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan recently wrote that, I'm quoting now, for the long term, the United States will need a counterterrorism capability in that region that doesn't depend on a permanent U.S. military presence in Afghanistan, which I completely agree with. My question is, what options has SOCOM provided to the Secretary to allow us to achieve counterterrorism objectives in Afghanistan without a permanent military presence in country?
Senator, we will always provide options. As you well know, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are not just in Afghanistan, but they are a global threat. And we will always provide the Secretary and the Department to the National command authority with options, so that if there is a threat, that we can actually deter or actually disrupt or defeat that threat.
And specifically, you're saying, and we can discuss this more in closed session as is appropriate, but just to be clear, you are working on providing options to deal with the counterterrorism, with the terrorism threat, and for counterterrorism measures that do not rely on a permanent standing military presence in country. Is that right?
Senator, there's been no decision made for Afghanistan, so I think it would be hypothetical to know what we're going to do at this time, but we will always provide options, for the Department of Defense.
Good. Well, I look forward to following up with you more on that. General Nakasone, let me come back to you here in my few remaining seconds. The People's Liberation Army, in their writings, often refer to cyber capabilities as the strategic commanding heights of future warfare. I'm wondering how the PLA's emphasis on information operations and maintaining the information advantage influences cybercom strategy for deterring China.
Senator, I think this whole discussion in terms of where our adversaries are going in the influence bases is among the most important areas that we're taking on at Cyber Command, that I know General Clark is addressing at U.S. Special Operations Command. This is really the competition that we are involved with today, where our adversaries are, again, trying to influence ourselves and our people through a number of different means. And so we have work ongoing today, ongoing both in our commands and with other commands, trying to address that as well.
Very good. I'll look forward to following up with you on that as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Kelly is recognized.
Thank you, Senator. I understand that in January of 2020, 9 combatant commanders, including you, General Clark, sent a letter to the Director of National Intelligence requesting more assistance from the intelligence community in being able to publicly illuminate malign influence and coercive activities by China and Russia. So to all the witnesses, starting with General Clark, what, if anything, has been done in response to this request from the 9 combatant commanders?
Senator, from that request, SOCOM with the other combatant commanders continues to look specifically in the information space and where we can best affect to provide capacity against our adversaries. And I think that specific memo led to some concurrent requirements being lifted for the department.
And in your view, would the illumination of these malign activities help to dissuade or deter China and Russia?
Senator, at this point in time, I cannot point to specific deterrence or detraction of that. I would tell you we continue to look, but I think it's most important that we continue to develop the capacity required to work in the information space.
General Nakasone?
Senator, to your second point there, I think it's a really important question. In terms of what our adversaries are doing today, our most effective response is being able to respond to what they're doing. And we have a number of different ways upon which we respond. Sometimes we respond through other means of the power in our government, whether or not it be diplomatic or sanctions or other ways. But I think it begins with the idea that we're in competition right now, and our adversaries are operating below the level of armed conflict in a matter of trying to influence us.
But in downgrading the classification of this intelligence, is that helpful in meeting the goal of dissuading more aggressive action from China or Russia?
I think we have to think broader than that, Senator. I think that it's more than just writing to release or perhaps even downgrading. It's, as General Clark alluded to, there are other means upon which we gather intelligence these days. How do we take the best tools, the best techniques, not only from our government, but also from the private sector, to look at what's occurring and being able to shine that spotlight? I think a lot of times we look and just say, hey, we'll simply go ahead and downgrade intelligence and provide that rapidly. Sometimes the better answer is, okay, where are the other streams of information? How can we use that most effectively with an audience?
Well, thank you, General. And to Mr. Mayor, so Section 1202 of the fiscal year 2018 NDAA sought to provide a new tool to counter these challenges by authorizing the Secretary of Defense to provide support to regular forces, irregular forces, and individuals who are supporting U.S. Special Forces, but that irregular warfare operation part. Last year's NDAA raised the annual cap on funding for this authority from $10 to $15 million. So, Mr. Mayor, how would you characterize the demand for this authority across the geographic combatant commands?
So, Senator, that's, I think, a very important tool we have that we haven't yet talked about in the great power competition. The demand is high. It takes some time, as you can understand, to build those partnerships to be able to operate in that partnership-driven approach. We view this very much as the successful 127 ECHO or the 1208 program, where there's a crawl, walk, run element to it. And I think that started very small, and as the progress and, in many respects, the high return on investment in terms of dollars and deployments and dwell and impact started to become apparent to the GCCs. It became more and more in demand. We see a similar model for 1202, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. What's the next one? Say it again. Okay. Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Sullivan.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, good to see you again. Thanks for all your work. Let me, General, let me start with you, General Clark. How are you feeling with regard to the resources that you have for your no-fail mission? You have a lot of no-fail missions, but your counter-WMD mission that SOCOM was a couple of years ago, given that mission as well. It's not like you didn't have a lot of missions on your plate. That's a big one. A number of us, myself in particular, were concerned that the Special Operations Command does a lot of things right, really well, but being given the lead on that one was a whole nother area that's really, really important, but also needs resources. And are you resourced enough for that mission? That is a mission that, of course, there's no doubt you can't fail on.
Senator, the bottom line is we do have sufficient resources to do that. The resources from STRATCOM that had that coordinating authority for CWMD were moved from STRATCOM over to SOCOM. I will continue to assess if additional resources are required going forward. But as you point out, the WMD threat is something that we must pay continuous attention to, because if we don't, we do it at our own peril.
And as I know you know, and you and I have discussed this, we're reorienting. I think it's the appropriate orientation for our military and national security to great power competition with China as the rising threat. But the WMD threat continues regardless of great power competition, and that could be from violent extremist organizations, which clearly want to get their hands on that. It can be from North Korea, who's a well-known proliferator, Pakistan. Are there any areas in particular that you're focused on as it relates to counter-WMD that's not in the headlines, but we should be sure we're focused on here as well?
Senator, one thing that we put some strong recommendations for is that's ensuring that our joint force is actually trained to work in a contested environment, so that our adversary is well aware that they will be denied the benefit of use of these capabilities. And that deterrent principle, I think, is critical. As you and I discussed yesterday, there are those that would like to wish this problem away,
right?
But we don't think we can, and we have to be prepared for its potential use.
Let me ask another issue, which I think this committee is very focused on. You know, the SOCOM enterprise, our special operations forces have been very focused appropriately post 9/11 in the Middle East. They've done a great job, heroic job. Many have lost their lives in their service to their country. How are we starting to transition from the focus there, which we still need to do, but we need to also start focusing on China and the Asia Pacific and the Indo-PACOM region? Are we doing enough there? Do we have enough experience with special operators? It's a very different battlefield, as you know. It's probably less kill and capture and more gray zone operations. What's your thinking on that, General?
Senator, this is going back to the future for SOF. Many of our forces were regionally aligned prior to 9/11 that had both the cultural and language understandings. And now as we've actually reduced forces in the places that you have named, some of these forces are going back to where they do have that understanding and those capabilities. So we've aligned in one case, I think important for the employment of our forces. But I think the second and really key aspect from a SOCOM perspective is that we have actually reallocated our budget for the modernization towards the capabilities that are required. So I've adjusted 14% of my budget in modernization towards great power competition for those unique soft capabilities.
Great. It's good to hear. General Nakasone, I just want to compliment you, sir. I think you've been doing a phenomenal job. You probably don't get complimented enough because you can't talk about what you do. But in my own experience here, I'm just starting my second term in the Senate. There was a hearing that I really remember in 2015, 2016. It was the Cyber Command. It was some of the others who were, I called us the cyber punching bag of the world. And the witnesses admitted that we don't retaliate when we're attacked from a cyber perspective. I don't think we're the cyber punching bag of the world anymore. And I think it's because of your work. You can't talk about a lot of that work, but can you just let the American people know that whether it's on elections or other cyber attacks, we're not just taking blows. We're going on offense. We're preemptive. I think it's really important for people to know that. That was not the posture 5 years ago. We were just getting pummeled, and we wouldn't do anything about it. Can you talk a little bit about that to the extent you can in an unclassified session?
Senator, I appreciate the question, and importantly, I appreciate the support of this committee because, as I was mentioning, really 2018 was a watershed year for us as we had looked at the future to a midterm election and knowing that we did not want to experience what we had experienced 2 years previously. The ability for this committee to pass the NDAA that year that allowed us to operate outside of our networks, cyber as a traditional military activity, moved us from being a static to an active force. And this idea of persistent engagement, always being involved with your adversaries, whether or not you're enabling our partners or acting against our adversaries is critical and underlying to our support in 2018, 2020, and today.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Let me now recognize Senator Duckworth via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do join my colleague, the senator from Alaska, in his admiration for the work that we've done, especially under your leadership, General Nakasone. General Clark, I appreciate our call yesterday, and I want to express my support for Special Operations Command's Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Plan. As we discussed on our call, bringing more people from diverse backgrounds into the Special Operations community will make it stronger. By infusing teams with different ideas and perspectives and enabling them to engage more effectively around the world. I agree with you that greater diversity in the Special Operations community is an operational imperative. That's why I sponsored the ELITE Act in last year's NDAA to identify and remove barriers to underrepresented groups' participation in elite communities of the armed forces. I'm glad to see that you've taken on the challenge of increasing diversity and inclusion in Special Operations Command, and it's an important first step in strengthening our military. And I really look forward to working together with you on this issue in the future. For my first question, I believe that being able to tap into the full talent and diverse perspectives of our population makes our military stronger. I also believe that in order to build the most capable military possible, we need to capitalize on the natural advantage of our National Guard and Reserve forces, namely that those service members are highly trained in their civilian jobs, as well as their military jobs. If we view this as a strength, we can benefit from the expertise that our guardsmen and reservists bring from civilian life, especially in fields that require advanced technical skills like cyber, General Nakasone, can you please describe how the National Guard and reservists, like members of the Illinois National Guard who are currently working with the 176th Cyber Protection Team, are contributing to your mission at U.S. Cyber Command?
Senator, thank you, and thank you for the question. The 176th Cyber Protection Team is a team well known to us at U.S. Cyber Command. They mobilized, came on active duty, and did a tremendous job in protecting our infrastructure, the actual capabilities upon which we utilize every single day to engage our adversaries. Led by, Major Jamie Marlock, who is the Cyber Protection Team leader. And really, it starts at the top with the Illinois National Guard Adjutant General, Brigadier General Neely, who has been instrumental in being out front, being very supportive of our efforts, and I think key to your point, attracting those that leave active duty service and continue to want to serve. And so the 176th is a great exemplar of our partnership with the Guard.
Thank you. And how will increasing National Guard and Reserve components participation in cyber operations improve our national readiness and capacity to combat cyber attacks? And how can Congress support this effort to increase the reserve forces participation in our cyber activities?
Senator, if I might use just an example, and I would say it's from the state of Connecticut, as we were operating with the Connecticut National Guard in the early fall of 2020. On the 2nd of September, Connecticut faced a ransomware attack on their public school systems. Operating with the Connecticut National Guard, they provided us information via a capability that we call the Cyber 9 line. That's utilizing a common ID card, being able to obviously share that in unclassified with us back at U.S. Cyber Command. We could use the power that we have at U.S. Cyber Command at the National Security Agency to look at this malware and to rapidly provide assistance. But at the end of the day, it was the Connecticut National Guard that did the work. And, taking an ability to look at a situation where your school has been shut down because of ransomware, and then in a matter of days being able to bring that back up, I think that shows the power of the Guard and the power of the partnership between the private and the public sector.
Thank you. And when I think of complex cyber missions, I do think in particular about the challenges that U.S. Transportation Command faces in securing its network and safeguarding sensitive information about our troops, our capabilities, and our postures and movement plans, while also working with numerous commercial partners, whether it is ocean-going or within the aviation community. General Nakasone, please describe your current work with U.S. Transportation Command and explain why it's important that Congress fully resource and support this and future initiatives like it.
Transportation Command is really a unique capability for our nation. It provides us global logistics. We're perhaps the only nation that can do that so readily and so well. And so under General Lyons' leadership at U.S. Transportation Command, he approached us and said, hey, we operate primarily off of the private sector with unclassified networks. How can you help? And so there has been a partnership ongoing for the past year and a half where both U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, and the National Security Agency have taken a look at how do we improve that public-private partnership, how do we ensure the security of the data that's being transmitted, and then also how do we look to the future. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. Let me recognize Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. General Nasaki, Space Force has already taken great steps in advancing U.S. national security in order to provide effectiveness needed. It is going to continue to need a strong backing from our cyber intelligence community. What role will the Cyber Mission Force and CyberCom play in the Space Force?
Senator, it's been an early and active role already. General Dickinson has been out to U.S. Cyber Command to talk about how do we secure the networks upon which he operates? How do we work, obviously, as we take a look at our overhead constellation? What are the threats that U.S. Spacecom is going to approach in the future? And so we have been actively engaged with him over a period of several months to identify those.
Thank you. General Clark, Section 922 of the 2017 NDAA, which was signed into law by President Obama, made clear that the administrative chain of command for the Special Operations Community runs from the President to the Secretary of Defense to ASD Solic and then to you. the SOCOM commander. Prior to conducting congressional engagements, do you obtain approval from ASDA Solic?
Mr. Secretary, we work very closely with ASD Solic in that administrative chain of command for oversight, particularly for our budget and our acquisition. Mr. Mayor and his predecessors provide that oversight. But it's also clear that my chain of command, and Secretary Austin made this very clearly to me, that my chain of command as a combatant commander runs to the Secretary of Defense, to the President.
Yeah, thank you. And that's kind of my next question. Do you support the implementation of the law and specifically ASD Solic's absolute control over administrative matters such as legislative engagements, budgetary, resource decisions, acquisitions, public affairs, personnel, legal accountability, and other related authorities held by the traditional military service?
Senator, what I believe is a key role for ASD Solic is actually to be an advocate for SOCOM within the department. And so when decisions are made about services and service budgets and service personnel decisions, having ASD Solic in the room to be able to be that advocate for us, to me, is the most important aspect that ASD Solic can do for SOCOM. It goes back to the old adage: if you're not at the table, you become the lunch. And having ASD Solic in and at that table, which has occurred, has been very helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Myers, I noted a moment ago the law mandates that the administrative chain of command for SOCOM passes from the President, Secretary of Defense, ASD Solic, SOCOM commander. In light of the clear chain of command, have you met with the Secretary of Administrative Matters related to SOCOM?
Senator, yes, I have, and I participate in the Secretary's regular service secretary meetings. I also participate, or my staff participate, in the series of governance meetings that the Deputy Secretary runs in order to do, just as was already said by General Clark, to both advocate, but for the administrative chain of command, we are responsible for both setting direction and ensuring execution and implementation consistent with the law.
How often y'all meet, you think?
The service secretaries meet at least twice a month. Obviously, new administration, so different series of meetings, but every day, sir, there's meetings that I'm representing ASD Solic in that service secretary-like hat with the secretary, deputy secretary, or their direct reports.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Senator Tuberville.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.